Hello, Reed Redden here with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Dr. Reagan Nolan, our agronomist here. So, Reagan, want to talk a little bit about forage variety trials, or your forage variety trials, or more specifically, like picking the right type of winter cereal forage that we're going to either dual use or primarily use for grazing, whether that's sheep or goats or cattle. So, this year, right before Christmas, we had unseasonably cold temperatures, dropped below 10 degrees with like -5 wind chill, and definitely had some impacts on the forages that we were growing for our sheep and then your variety trial here.
Right.
So I guess let's start with uh, what did these variety trials do for us? What do y'all plant in here? And how do people comb through some of that data?
Sure. So we compare kind of current and new and available varieties of wheat, barley, triticale, oats. So we're kind of going across different species and varieties of winter annual cereals that are planted for grazing in this area. And the exciting thing, not to be excited about a stress event, but about a situation like this, is having a trial out here gives us the opportunity to compare cold sensitivity, or say it were a pest infestation or a disease infestation. We'd be able to come out and say, okay, this species or this variety performed differently under these conditions.
Yeah.
And so that information, along with clippings and forage quality data, are summarized and published every year through our variety testing website. And so that information's out there for folks to go track down and look for. We present it at a lot of our programs and try to share it as we can. So.
Yeah, I think we'll kind of maybe walk around a little bit so we can see some of these
Sure.
differences. I mean, to start with, we always like to plant oats here because oats, it really comes on early, and the sheep and goats really like it. It's exceptionally palatable to them. And things were looking really good about December 15th. We had the right rainfall, the right temperatures. All of this oats over here was, knee deep and just exceptionally lush. But the risk is with oats is being a little less cold tolerant than some of the other wheat stuff and other species that you have out here. And so would you say that that's kind of a universal rule that oats tend to be more cold sensitive, or is it more important to think about what species of oats or wheat or triticale that we're using?
Both variety and species are going to matter. The situation here had a lot to do with planting date as well. And so we've had oat variety trials that we've planted later in the year that hadn't gone reproductive yet, that overwintered through some of our extreme cold temperatures over the past couple winters and really did fine.
Yeah.
And so it has a lot to do with timing and growth stage. So oats are facultative. They grow and go to seed as they're able to. They don't have to overwinter like wheat does. And so that's a big factor here. These were planted in early October. We've got oats in our variety trials here that were planted mid-October, a week or two later. And there is some leaf burn. These are two different oat varieties right here. So there's obviously differences between varieties in cold sensitivity because these were planted at the same time and were at the same growth stage. And then there's differences in planting date, which the other variety of oats that was planted earlier that got burned really bad had already started reproductive growth whenever that cold snap hit.
Okay.
So.
All right. So, I'm sure you get the same kind of questions that I do. People are like, oh, this is all good data. Y'all are kind of the scientist data geeks, and they want to know, what do they need to plant? What's the one to go to?
Yeah.
But reality, it's more complicated than that.
Sure.
And so what are the major factors if you're thinking about forage being planted? Is it, the time you're planting it? Is it, when does that season? What if you were boiling it down to say three things? What are those major factors to think about?
So planting conditions in the fall are huge. You can intend on getting oats in early and having this great yield of fall grazing before it gets really cold in the winter, and then it not rain, right? And so if you have good planting conditions in September or into October, you can do great with early planted oats, but you don't want to have to rely on making it through the winter on those. Yeah. They're going to give you some pretty quick, good fall grazing, but they might freeze out like this. Something like wheat or triticale is going to overwinter and not give you as much on the front end, but going into late winter and spring, it's going to persist and be a longer season of grazing and give you more kind of over the duration. So I would consider timing as a big factor on what species to pick, and then opportunities to diversify. So if you want to plant a field of oats and a field of wheat, you spread your risk, and you're not all in one situation whenever something like this happens.
Okay. So looking out here right now, I mean, let's just kind of see if we can't find a plot where you would have been like, this is the right one for
Sure.
an early season.
Yeah.
Amazing window.
Right.
Obviously these right here look a lot better than the oats in front of it.
Yeah. So this first range here is all wheat until the very last plot over there that looks burned. That's a barley variety. But these wheat varieties that were planted mid-October, had good rain, good growing conditions through October and November, they're looking really great right now. And so I'm kind of on board with that. And it's easy because wheat is a common, easy to come by crop and seed for us here. And among varieties, there are going to be differences in production potential and forage quality and things like that, and that's what we're testing here. But just comparing species, it's a pretty easy one to plug in. And is really kind of a consistent workhorse, very reliable and good for us.
Okay. Is there any other things, like, I mean, we're talking about the season of growth, but like pest resistance and disease resistance, do those kind of play into some of this as well?
Absolutely, and you get into both species and variety differences there too. So people that have issues with Hessian fly in wheat, we have some genetic resistance or tolerance to Hessian fly. But oats aren't infected with Hessian fly at all. And so that species isn't affected by that pest. There are certain rusts and certain diseases that affect oats that don't affect other things, you know. And so you have these differences to consider there, but then within a species, looking at newer varieties that are being developed with resistance to the latest kind of races and pathogens of different bacteria or pests. I shouldn't have said bacteria, fungus. Both, really, but mostly fungal pathogens are going to be the, kind of the angle to take on this, is looking at what's new and what has the latest, most comprehensive disease and pest resistance. Okay. And so there are definitely differences between varieties when it comes to that.
All right. Now, jumping back into the diversification, using maybe multiple different species or different varieties within a species that give you that early versus late growth.
Yeah.
Do you plant those, mix them in a planter and put them together? Do you subdivide the fields? Do you plant one earlier and then give time and do the next one? Or what's the most common practice, and what do you think kind of is the easiest path forward to get the most benefit?
It's probably most common and simple and straightforward to divide between fields. Plant this field in oats and that field in wheat. I think there's some really interesting research questions to ask about mixing species and varieties in the drill, or doing a few rows of this and a few rows of that, or a pass of this and a pass of that. The risk with that is whenever something happens to one of those species, is the other one going to have enough, of a stand or whatever to compete and to compensate, or are you then at a disadvantage? If you could time it right where one of them plays out and the other one takes over and you extend the grazing period, then it's a really cool concept. But I wouldn't say that we've got the data to support a recommendation on that right now.
Yeah, so some of these better producing or better doing wheat varieties, if you'd have planted this oats that did really good early and got hammered by this, they wouldn't have looked as good because they're competing with each other.
Yeah.
Same space and moisture.
Right. But on the same note, as these oats were dying out, if you had some of this wheat planted right there amongst them, that would be coming through now and going forward, and it would already be established. So it could work out, but now I would say segregating fields is probably the simplest and most reasonable option. So then you have the option, if you have to go in and fail something out and replant, you could do that to the whole field. Right. You're not having to monitor or be as concerned about those interactions.
So where do folks find these forage variety trial test data?
So variety testing at tamu.edu is our main website that has winter small grains and cotton and winter and summer annual forages and all of the different cultivated annual crops that we grow in Texas. We have variety testing information on that website. And so that's a great place to go sort through and look at what's out there.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, thanks.
You bet.